People like to say things. Some people like to say, life is like a box of chocolates. Some people like to repeat phrases like, you know what I mean? Some people like to say, and whatnot. And some people like to say, jolly good. And some people like to say, there's no evidence for God. Actually, I've heard it more than a few times, and considering the massive implications of this phrase, it makes me want to stop for a second and say, I think I'm with you, sort of. I'd say there's no evidence for some gods. Take, for example, one of my least favorite gods, the god who partners with human military organizations, a god who endorses specific military missions, as in, I need country X to defeat country Y so that I can... I mean, look at how many words in that sentence show a need or limitedness, not fitting characteristics for a god. Plus, if there's a god that can be motivated by something as simple and mundane as making people physically die for his time-based gain of certain portions of his own planet, that god should, you're right, show some evidence. Why would that god, who, depending on who you are, could be burning to have you gunned down by an assault rifle, why would he care whether or not you were left in freedom to choose or forced to believe in him by miracles? Why wouldn't he show himself? Why wouldn't he lead his armies? He wants power, and he wants to get his way. That god should want evidence. He should broadcast his own cable news show. Unless he wants to hide behind the scenes and let us take each other out just for the fun of it, and in that case, how does it make sense that so many just, fair, civil people have surpassed their creator morally? Yes, I agree there's no evidence for that God. But no evidence for God? Whoa, easy there, Rambo. Way back in the year something, there were some guys meeting in a castle. It was the middle of January and there was snow all over everything. There was so much snow that they had to kick off their boots and stuff while they were coming through the door, and snow was coming down through holes in the roof and getting on their hair and on their beards and stuff. But it was an important meeting, so they just dealt with it and got down to the business at hand.
Alright, you lot. Next we have on the agenda a presentation by John Flon.
Yes, well, thank you, everyone. I would like to say that, today that I believe that the Earth is tilted. Well, that's crazy talk. The world isn't tilted. There's no evidence for that. If the world was tilted, then I'd put my glass of water on this table, then the line at the top of the water would be tilted. Just like when I put it on a tilty table. But look, it's straight. I'll settle this once and for all. As we all know, when you put a ball on something that's tilted, it rolls. But when I put this ball on the ground, look, it's as still as a whistle.
John, the world is obviously not tilted. Besides what those two guys already proved, just look at everyday experience. We look out and we see the Earth with our eyes, we can tell it's not tilted. We stand on the ground and we can feel that it's not tilted. Your claim is absolutely groundless and baseless because there's absolutely no evidence for it.
So, they concluded that there was no way the world was tilted because there was no evidence for it. But there was. In fact, they were covered in it, as any third grader of today could tell you. For those of you in second grade, let me bring you up to speed. Because the Earth is tilted on its axis of rotation, the two hemispheres take turns being tilted away from the Sun as the Earth makes its orbit. This tilt causes a hemisphere to receive more or less sunlight, and for that sunlight to strike it more or less directly, causing warmth, cold, and all other seasonal variations, including snow. There was evidence for the Earth's tilt. It was all over them. It was on their heads and in their beards, and you could have picked it up off the floor and thrown it at them in, some kind of like ball form. So what was the problem? They saw the evidence, but they didn't know it was evidence, and they never could have guessed that it was because they lacked basic information about the structure of reality. And keep in mind that when people thought the sun moved around the Earth, what did they point at for evidence? They pointed at the sun, moving through the sky, when actually what they were pointing at was us, moving around the sun. There was a precedent set for people actually observing reality and pointing to it as evidence for their misconceptions. So what do we point at today to say there's no God? Suffering? Are we so sure that the existence of God would mean that we would be unable to choose to make war on each other? Religious fundamentalists and some of the ugly ideas about God some people are shouting? Come on. Saying that there can't be a God because of them is like if there was a crazy farmer somewhere who started throwing his corn at people so you stop eating. People pointed at reality to support the wrong conclusion. The fact that we now point at the uniformity of the laws of physics and the majesty and beauty of the science behind the universe as evidence that no God exists just might be ripe to give our great-great-grandchildren a really good laugh. You couldn't show these guys the snow and say, that's evidence for the Earth's tilt, because they didn't know the fundamentals about their situation, that the world is round, the nature of gravity, that we orbit the sun. So if we lack critical knowledge, like that there are spheres of generative force emanating from the divine, that the spiritual dimension is the cause that produces this effect that we call the physical world, or whatever, how are we supposed to connect the dots and identify evidence for what it is? And John Flahn couldn't have directly showed these guys the Earth's tilt. There were no rocket ships, there were no space telescopes. The technology simply wasn't there. Likewise, have something in us gone dormant? Or have we lost something? Some ability that our ancestors had, or that any of the people who have had a near-death experience, or any of the other widely reported categories of spiritual phenomena somehow woke back up to? They were covered in evidence, but they failed to pick up that it was evidence. So maybe we should take a closer look at our world before we jump to conclusions. There's evidence for something all around us, that jokes are funny, the incredibly nuanced personalities that make each one of us, that every single atom obeys the laws of physics, all cajillion of them, when we can't even get people close to obeying that follow 3 seconds behind the car in front of you rule. Sunsets are beautiful. Clear water is beautiful. It's all evidence for something, we just have no idea what. Looking for evidence for God? A divine creator that emanates through everything? The evidence we would be looking for would be big, central, intrinsic things, not a face on a piece of toast. Maybe our emotions are evidence for God. Maybe that we can feel for each other, that we can want to bond with and care for others outside of ourselves. Why is it central to life? Why can our need for self-esteem and meaningful connection overshadow even our need for food and shelter? Maybe the fact that you can wish for a war to stop is evidence. That you can wish for peace for people you'll never meet and need nothing from. Maybe that you can yearn for your brother to put his life back together, or that somebody can say a kind word to you and it can really change your week. Maybe that feeling of love in you isn't just evidence. Maybe that is God. Maybe it's even more blatant than that. Maybe the fact that we exist is evidence. Everyone's got to admit that it's a little weird that things exist rather than not. No virtual world inside a video game exists without some machine running the lines of code. So what's running our world? I think it's a little early in the human race's journey of acquiring knowledge to say we know enough to say nothing around us is evidence for God. That's all. Just some thoughts. I just don't want us all to embarrass ourselves by being really off about this God thing.